Coop, this is the one that a lot of people asked us about last week. We didn't get to, but it's something you had a lot of fun digging in on. Recruiting in North Carolina, man. Tell me what you found.
Yeah, well, I mean, they've done a really good job. I've been really impressed with Mack Brown and the job that he's done. It hasn't really translated onto the field in terms of wins and losses yet, but what they've done this year has been pretty impressive. They're sitting at number 9 in terms of the 247 composite rankings. They've done a really good job. And the one thing from a geographic standpoint that has been different than what they've done in the last 2 classes is a job that they've done in the state of Virginia. They have 7 players out of the 16 committed from the state of Virginia, and they have the top 5 out of the top 8 players in that state. And they've done a tremendous job. And if you were to tell me, handpick 5 guys from the state of Virginia that you'd want, it'd be all those 5 guys. So they've done a really good job, I think, really on both sides of the line of scrimmage, too. I think you look at Travis Shaw, defensive lineman from North Carolina, Zach Rice on the offensive line, really good tackle there from Virginia. Andre Green, who Clemson was all over, right? The receiver from Virginia, Petaway, to Sean Chapman, Tayon Holloway, really good skill position. They've done a really good job at running back. I love what North Carolina is doing. Now it's just time to see, can that materialize on the field?
Yeah, I'm extremely interested in what they're doing because them and Miami really profile as the 2 teams that have the ability to elevate their recruiting at a level to where they can basically show the rest of the division their taillights if it comes together with the coaching and the player development. Miami not really doing it right now. North Carolina, the last couple of years, has been doing it on the recruiting trail. One thing that we talked a lot about back on Barton and Bud and then in the Cover 3 previews this year, I was in on Carolina if their lines of scrimmage could arrive a year early, particularly their defensive line. We knew they had a lot of young pups that were going to be a year or 2 players this year. And, ultimately, it just hasn't gotten there to the level they need it to. They get pushed around too much at the lines of scrimmage. I'm not going to be like, hey, fire the strength coach guy because I don't know enough about what they're doing inside that program. And it may just be unrealistic to think some of the guys they took were going to be ready to be all impact players in year 2. But they have some guys in that program who they've been recruiting who are pretty damn talented. And the state of North Carolina and that Virginia area are pretty underrated as well, in my opinion, for one thing, edge rushing talent. I don't know if it's because everybody grows up playing basketball, so we have so many dudes with good basketball builds there. But there's no doubt they have the ability, especially if Miami messes up this hire or if it turns out that keeping Manny Diaz is a screw up in and of itself, and I don't know that it is. He may end up being the correct guy there. They have the ability to put some distance between themselves and the division. And it's no coincidence, by the way, they've taken advantage. We talked about Florida not taking advantage of the other people around you being down. North Carolina has absolutely taken advantage of Tennessee being down and of Virginia Tech being down. And I think that Virginia Tech job is less attractive than it used to be in some measure because now you have to face a lot better recruiting teams in that area that are mining that area you used to go to for talent.
Yeah, and that's a really talent-rich area. You look at the DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia, and North Carolina's done a really good job kind of tapping into that. We talked about earlier in the show, programs understanding timing and opportunity, and when those 2 collide and taking advantage of Virginia Tech being down, maybe Penn State not being as much in that area as they usually are. Florida State has usually done a really good job in the Virginia area, and they haven't been in the mix there as much either. So, and then you look at Clemson, they're starting to kind of spread their wings nationally too, so as they can. But it leaves this kind of big void where you see Carolina taking advantage of it this year. I mean, I look back their last 2 classes, there wasn't a lot of guys from the state of Virginia. They've done a really good job in the state of North Carolina. And I think that's important. I mean, we get back to the overarching theme of like what makes these teams successful. Like you got to understand your boundaries and where, how far you can really limit yourself in terms of where you can go in terms of your geographical recruiting plan. And it's very easy to see sometimes when you're looking at some of these schools and kind of following them and see, okay, what are these guys doing? I mean, you look at North Carolina, 7 in Virginia, 4 in North Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, and then you kind of have in South Carolina, and then 2 outliers in Illinois and Pennsylvania. And one of those guys is a specialist, and the other one is Sebastian Cheeks, who's a top 247 inside linebacker, who's a really good player that can play sideline to sideline. So they've done a really good job operating within the constraints of their program and kind of maximizing that. And, you know, it's easy to see these teams with a vision and they're sticking to their plan.
There's no doubt about it. I just found the stat, by the way, to go back and pull it up. North Carolina 5th on defense in Bill Connolly's SP Plus rating, 81st on offense. So it does feel like for this year on the field, at least, they've kind of squandered a really nice year from Sam Howell, but yet have found a way to score a lot of points. Even though they lost a lot of skill talent around him that is now playing on Sundays. But defensive line havoc rate, 120th in the country. Solid secondary, pretty good linebacking core, I think. They got to find a way to get that defensive line talent they've recruited and turn it into on-field performance. But man, like they're putting the building blocks in place. It's going to be up to the staff now to develop those guys, which I assume they will. That's I don't know. I don't know if they actually took as big of a step back this year as people thought they did. It does make you wonder a little bit if they missed a window, which this division seems pretty winnable this year. And they were not able to do it. Losses at Virginia Tech to open the year, who fired their coach. Loss at Georgia Tech, who's going to go 3-9 or 4-8 this year. Really not competitive loss at Georgia Tech. They lost by 23 in that one. Florida State beat them by 10 in Chapel Hill. They were fairly competitive against Pitt, in that rain game. I don't think they're that far away if they get the defensive line to step up, which I think they have the pieces. They couldn't arrive in time. They needed the cavalry to get here a little bit earlier. They also signed a quarterback in last year's class who a lot of people like. So even though I think you'll probably lose Sam Howell after this year because this is not a good draft for quarterbacks, they're not completely bare at that position.
Yeah, they've done a good job. And I think, it goes without saying, I think next year is a critical year for Mack Brown in North Carolina in terms of evaluating these guys and getting a good understanding. Now you kind of seen the roster take place. You've seen 3 really good recruiting classes. So now I think this is the program that Mack has built and the one that he's been handing. He's done a really good job in terms of the roster composition. Now it's just, can you set a consistent standard of play? And they should be outperforming even in the midst of this year. Like, it's just been consistency. And I think those have kind of been the issues across the board. But I'm looking forward to next year. I mean, there's no reason that team shouldn't be a very good and competitive team in that conference.